Hey everybody, welcome back to the Project Gen X podcast. This is a mini episode that I'm putting together. We do have a regular episode coming this week, but I wanted to do this one because I had a chance to go to the movies a couple of times in the last week, and neither one of them are, well, one of them we might actually at some point talk about. But as of right now, we're not going to do any reviews on either one of these movies. The first one I saw was the new Kevin Smith movie, Clerks 3. Now, you know that if you've listened to our show for any amount of time, you know that Dave and I and Barry all love Clerks. And we did an episode, and I think it was in our first year, about Clerks and Clerks 2, and Dave and I, we gushed over both the movies. I have many times said that Clerks, for Gen X, but especially for my own life, has mirrored a lot of what was going on at the time when these movies were released. When the first one released, I was 20 years old in 1994, working a dead-end job, and just really kind of like trying to figure out what's going on in life, and stuff like Star Wars and just interactions with random people. Just a lot of that stuff really rang true. Then we get to Clerks 2. You fast forward, that one came out in 2006, so it was 12 years later, and I have to say that I was going through kind of my own midlife crisis at the time, and so that movie hit me where I lived once again. And now we get to Clerks 3, which is another 12 years or 16 years later. And it again hits me, and it will hit a lot of people where they live in dealing with middle-aged, being 50-ish years old, and the things that go with that. If you know anything about Kevin Smith in the last few years, then you've heard him talk about his heart attack. And, it obviously affected him quite a bit. And he wrote that into the movie. And it gets really meta. You can tell if you watch the trailer, it gets really meta about, Randall has a heart attack and decides that he wants to do something with his life, so he decides to make a movie about him and Dante working at the Quick Stop, and so it's essentially him making the first Clerks movie. What I didn't know going into this movie was just how emotional this movie was going to be. Clerks 3 really touches on people looking at mortality, being in that middle age, in that 50-year-old range, and thinking about like, how much time do I have left? And is the threat of a heart attack really looming over us all at any given time? You're kind of like just around the corner, but also dealing with loss, because there is a subplot, or not really a subplot, but there is an aspect of the story that happens between the movies that I did not see coming. That really just it was rough. And I will say this: I don't want to give a bunch of spoilers. I'm not going to give any spoilers if I can in this movie, or in this review. But one of the things that I've always kind of had a little bit of a problem with the Clerks movies. I mean, in the first Clerks, I didn't have the problem with. The second one, I really started having problems with the character of Randall, because he's such an asshole and so self-centered. And I know that was kind of like, when you're 22 years old, however old they're supposed to be in this. I think they're like 22, 23, somewhere in there. You can get away with that and kind of be, oh yeah, they're, he's young. It's, just kind of whatever. You fast forward and, now you're over 30 and you're still acting that same way. And it's like, all right, this isn't as funny as it once was. And then you get to Clerks 3, and the character of Randall has a reckoning with all of that. Finally. And, it's handled pretty well. I have often said about Kevin Smith that he is at his best. Most people always talk about, his dialogue, or, all this pop culture references and this and that. I've always felt like Kevin Smith is at his best when he is kind of being sentimental and he's kind of getting to the heart of things and dealing with actual real life as opposed to this hyper real life that you see in his movies a lot of times. It goes back to Chasing Amy. I've always loved that movie, and I always looked at, there's been a lot said about that, about Chasing Amy, about the way the subject matter was handled here and there. When I first saw it back in 97 and all the way to now, I've always looked at that as like, you know what, if you take Alyssa Jones and you take away her being a lesbian before she meets Holden and just let her be, a straight woman or any, however you want to do that. If you want to reverse the roles, whatever it is, it really comes down to how people deal with insecurities inside of their relationships. And it really gets very heartfelt and really destructive. And it opens up it shines a light on a lot of the ugly that happens inside of relationships when people's insecurities start coming to the surface. That's the read I've always had on it. And Clerks 2 really got to the heart of the matter of, these two characters that feel like they're still stuck, that they've been stuck for all these years. And one of them thinks he sees a way out, even though he's going to essentially be, Dante, marrying, getting engaged to Emma and wanting to, move to Florida with her. It really is that whole, because Becky calls him out and says, hey, you're going with the safe option here. She's going to tell you what to do. You don't have to think about anything. You don't ever have to make any decisions on your own again, because she's going to make all of them for you. And, him having to reckon with that, and Randall having to reckon with the whole, did life pass me by, and have I spent the last 12 years at Quick Stop and at movies and not doing anything with my life. And then, at the end of that movie, when it comes down to the whole, like, no, if I had a choice, I would buy the Quick Stop and we would own it, or we would own it together and work there. And that's what we would do. Great way. This movie, again, deals with characters coming to terms with their mortality. Like I said, I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but this movie ends about the only way that this series could end. And I know that might be a light spoiler there, but it really is one of those, this has to be the end of the Clerks saga. Especially the way that it was written and everything, Of course, they can always do a reboot like they did with Jay and Silent Bob a few years ago, or whatever. But it really is a nice cap. What started almost 30 years ago, and now, hey, here we are on the end of it. Kind of, really telling the, bringing an end to the story of the Clerks, and I highly recommend seeing it if you get a chance. I'm sure it'll be on VOD before long. But yeah, definitely. I'll tell you the one problem that I had with the movie was the crowd. This is the same problem I've had with going to see Kevin Smith movies many times over the years, is that the crowd that shows up are such fanboys and fangirls that every little thing that's even a slight reference to something that happened before, there's people laughing and pointing, oh yeah, that was this. And it's just like, God, can we just watch the movie? I mean, yeah, we all get it. Okay. We're all here. We get it. Let's just watch the movie. That's my complaint about a lot of things, though, is just people so caught up in references that they're kind of failing to see the bigger picture. That's neither here nor there. Clerks 3, on my scale, I usually do a 5-star. I will give it 4 stars. As far as, like, and this is how I rate Clerks 2 and Clerks 3, is that Clerks 2 is most definitely, it's kind of the Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy. It is the better, in my opinion. It is the better of the movies. Clerks is a very close second. Clerks 3 is a very close third behind that. It really does round out the trilogy nicely. So, go check out Clerks 3. All right, so the other movie that I got to see this last weekend was something that I remembered hearing that it was going to be that was going to be made, but I didn't hear anything else about it for a while, partly because I just hadn't been keeping up with a lot of the trades or anything. There was a documentary that was released this last weekend called Moonage Daydream. So if you know me, you know anything about pop culture in the last 50 years, then you know it's a documentary about David Bowie. And it's really kind of cool because unlike a lot of other documentaries where they sit down and they talk to the people that were around the person, that were there in the recording sessions, or, friends and family and that kind of stuff, this is all told with David Bowie's own words. Starting back, in the early 70s, all the way through until his unfortunate passing in 2016. It's a bunch of archive interviews that he did, and it covers all the aspects. It's not just his music; it also covers him acting. It also covers his artwork, which I've seen bits and pieces of his paintings over the years. But even in this documentary, he talks about how he didn't really show a lot of his paintings for a long time because those were his, and he wasn't sure that he was ready to share them with the world. We get to see a lot of them here. It's really kind of cool. I really enjoyed it quite a bit, to be honest. It 2 hours and 15 minutes long, does not feel like it whatsoever. Visually, it is stunning. They intercut pieces of classic film and different things like that in between from time to time. It's not the best way I know how to describe it is kind of like the old show Dream On, the way that they would intercut stuff, in between scenes. They do a little bit of that here, not to the same degree. It's not a constant thing. It's just every once in a while, as well as, a lot of it is intercuts of him doing different, whether it's on stage or him in interviews, or even just, I guess where some people had followed him around in the past, for stuff for the BBC or whatever. And he was, just kind of like going through his daily life. It's really kind of neat to see. Plus the fact that, of course, the music is just great. It's got quite a few live performances. None of them really stood out as oh, this is, you have to see this. And it's not as comprehensive as you might think. It really touches on the 70s stuff, especially through the Ziggy Stardust and, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars. It goes a little bit into the Berlin cycle, and then it picks up with Let's Dance, where he had kind of gone into exile for a number of years, so it didn't tour. He released albums, but he just didn't tour during that time period. And then it kind of picks up there, and it gets bits and pieces through the rest of the 80s and a little bit into the 90s, but then it just kind of jumps forward. And I just say forward because it's linear, but it's not this happened, and this happened, and this happened type linear, where it's like it's telling a story of his life, but it's not necessarily, doing it in what you would see in a biopic or something like that. It's pretty interesting. Again, like I said, it's all him. There's no one else in this that's narrating about David Bowie. There's a few other people in there, in interviews will show the interviewer, but it's all his words talking about himself and why he does the things that he does, why he keeps putting on these, creating these new personas and this and that. I highly, highly recommend it. I enjoyed it immensely, and I will say this about both movies. I did not walk out of either theater with a dry face. Okay, it's for different reasons, some similar reasons, but some different reasons as well. And if you get a chance, it's in IMAX, which is really kind of cool. So that's the only way that Moonage Daydream is being shown, is in IMAX, and that's kind of cool to sit there on this huge screen and see this larger than life figure going through his life. And I recommend both of these. Like I said, this is the first mini episode that I'm going to... let me give you, before I get into all of it, as far as Moonage Daydream goes, I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. That is... the only reason I don't give it a full 5 stars is because it does skip everything he did in the 90s and even into the early 2000s quite a bit, with Outside and Earthling, and I forget what the other album was that was in there that he did that came out in like 2000, 2001, whatever. I forget. Anyways, and then it kind of skips on to the 2010s, the last few years of his life. And but it's still a great watch. It's especially if you're a Bowie fan. Of course, if you listen to the show, you know that, especially after hearing our Labyrinth episode, you can see that that all three of us are Bowie fans, myself especially. So yeah, Clerks 3, Moonage Daydream. Definitely go see them while they're still in the theaters. If not, I understand. I mean, it's one of those things that neither one of them are required theater viewing. But if you get a chance, I would say go ahead and do it, especially on the Moonage Daydream in IMAX, because it's just so great. So this is just a mini episode that I'm doing. I may do a few of these going forward, maybe like once a month. It kind of depends. Sometimes with schedules, I seem to be the one that actually has more time to go and see and do things than either of the other two, because they have like real jobs and and wives, and all the responsibility that comes with that. Thank you for spending this 15-ish minutes with me, and I will be back with some more. Quite honestly, in the future we may see Barry or Dave do these as well, just to kind of throw them in midweek stuff or whatever in between episodes. So yeah, guys, thank you so much. Like I said, there will be another episode this week, a little later on. I'm doing some editing there, but I wanted to get this out while both these movies are still in the theater and still relevant, so that everyone can hear my take on them, and maybe it will encourage you to go see them. So we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks. Bye.
There's a starman waiting in the sky.